Hi everyone, my name's Darren Aladesanmi, and this is my film review of The Spy Gone North. So, starting with a brief introduction, the movie is a spy and drama film written and directed by Yoon Jung Bin, and it's loosely based off the life work of Park Chae-seo, who was one of South Korea's most legendary spies, and a lot of his work happened in the 1990s. So, the movie was released in August of 2018 in South Korea, but it actually debuted a few months prior in the Cannes Film Festival, and its North American release was just about 10 days or so after its South Korean release. And the movie has received many positive reviews, awards, and nominations, and that includes a 100% critic rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And with a budget of about $14 million, it was able to gross just under $40 million in the box office. So moving on to more about the director of the movie, Young Jun Bin has been writing and directing films since 2004, and he's now over 40 years old. And he's written and directed five major feature films, and he directed his first television show just last year. And there are five actors that he regularly casts in his work, including his good friend Ha Jung Woo, who went to school at Chung'ang University with him and is actually in this movie Spy Gone North. And part of Yoon Jung Bin's critical acclaim and claim to fame is 100% The Spy Gone North, as he's been nominated for over 20 different awards for this specific movie and has won over half of all those nominations. But there are definitely similar themes within all of his movies. Many of them look at the Korean military or corruption within the Korean government. They explore friendship between men and what masculinity and friendship looks like, and just many other, pressing relevant themes for Korean history and present day society. So, moving on to the more specifics of his work, his first major film was The Unforgiven in 2005 that explores compulsory military service for Korean youth. And then moving on to The Beastie Boys that premiered in 2008, which kind of discusses sex work of men in Korea, which also kind of ties back to some of the other films we watched in class. And next we have The Nameless Gangster in 2012. It was released and it discusses the severe corruption in Korea and the government's desire to really crack down on it. Moving on, we have Kundo, released in 2014, and this is one of this director's more violent action past film that actually has kind of less political commentary. And his TV show, most recently, Narco Saints, kind of follows the life of a drug lord and all the difficulties that come with that. So moving back to The Spy Gone North, there are many major characters, but these are four that are really important to the progression of the film. First, we have Park Seo Kyung, who is Black Venus in the film, and he poses as a businessman and various different things to infiltrate North Korea, and it's really his story that we're following throughout the film. Next, we have Ri Myung Yeon, who plays a high ranking North Korean official who does a lot of work with currency and money and has a lot of power and influence within the North Korean party and politics. Then we have Choi Hak Seung, who is the director of the South Korean National Intelligence Service, the NIS, which is essentially just the South Korean CIA. And he is essentially the Black Venus's boss. So Black Venus reports to him throughout the film and regularly gives him updates on his work and updates. And then we have Jang Myok Taek, who is the State Security Department head for North Korea. He's a relatively cold, somewhat abrasive character without the film, but he plays a major role. And a few of the other important roles and characters within the film include the actual leader of North Korea, who Black Venus gets to meet, and generally just other high ranking, either South Korean or North Korean officials who progress the story forward. But moving on to the historical context and placement of the film, the movie actually starts with a few lines describing how the end of World War II split Korea into the North and South, ruled by the Soviet Union and the United States, respectively. And after that split, the Korean War occurred, which permanently sealed both these regions into being their own countries. And that kind of launched both countries into a really intense Cold War where lots of espionage took place and spies from both countries were sent to the opposite country. Generally, the movie takes place in the 1990s, which was a time, during this Cold War that South Korea was really worried about the scale of weaponry from North Korea. We're talking nuclear weapons, missiles, things of that nature. But at the same time, South Korea is transitioning even further to be a country of democracy, supposedly. So during this time in North Korea, the Conservative Party held much more power than the Progressive Party. This was mostly because there were major ties from the Conservative Party to the NIS, and the NIS was able to ensure that the Conservative Party won certain special elections. And then moving on to a brief synopsis of The Spy Gone North. Black Venus is a South Korean spy who's recruited, and the movie kind of starts off with him gambling and getting drunk to reinvent his identity before he is sent off to do all this work. And he is sent as a kind of disgruntled former South Korean military person who then goes to Hong Kong to try to connect business with the North Koreans with the pose and idea that he really just wants to get rich as quickly as possible and he's willing to do whatever that looks like, even if it doesn't look great to his country. And although that's how he starts the film and that's how he poses, it's really working as a collaborator with a successful advertiser who does have ties to North Korea that allows him to actually set foot in the country of North Korea. And throughout his working as a spy and espionage, taking notes, recording conversations that he's having with these important leaders, he discovers a really insidious collaboration between North and South Korea, specifically that the South Korean government is really corrupted and they want him to change his mission so that he can get South Korea to go ahead with launching missiles as a scare tactic that will ultimately rig or like push the election in South Korea the way that the Conservative Party wants. And this realization causes Black Venus a lot of inner turmoil because he questions his loyalty to his country and his work as a spy, and he kind of begins to have to question everything he knows, and poses a really great ethical dilemma that he has to face. And ultimately, he's able to prevent the election corruption from happening. But this happens with a lot of questioning and shows a very interesting perspective of collaboration and relations between North and South Korea government officials and things of that nature. But moving on to the lessons learned from this film, this was a really interesting film for me to watch because there are four main things that really stood out to me. The first one being the role of international relations. In the West, especially the US, we're really presented a very stagnant, flat version of North Korean and South Korean relations. So this movie kind of presented some of the complexities of that so that no one really thinks that it's as easy or black and white as it sometimes is reported to be. And then also the impact of technology really stood out to me in this film because scenes of Black Venus having to stick like really old technology to record conversations was very interesting because in today's society we're able to make video cameras and recording devices way smaller and much more discreet, and in some ways that could be a lot more helpful and maybe even make it easier or more safe to be a spy in this time. Additionally, the power of history really stood out to me. Of course, the movie opens with a few sentences and descriptions of history, World War II and the Korean War, and the division of South Korea and North Korea was caused by, the World War II and the Korean War, and that's an impact felt even to today in 2023, and that's also shown in the movie, even though that was only about 20 or so years after it happened. And lastly, the role of institutional power, the role of governments, the need for them to represent the people, but not always doing that and instead abusing their power was really exposed in this film. So that's something that I think everyone can relate to, no matter what country they are a part of, unfortunately. But thank you so much for listening. And that was my review of The Spy Gone North.